Welcome, LA Progressive friends, family, readers. This is Sharon Kyle coming to you this afternoon, joined by a new friend, Mr. Erik Fleming, who I was introduced to via one of our social media platforms. Social media really has changed our world. Mr. Erik Fleming is an African American native of Chicago. He was an elected official in the Deep South for many years, and he has recently embarked on creating a podcast known as A Moment with Erik Fleming, and he interviewed me last week. And so I'm returning the favor for two reasons. One was it was very gracious of him for inviting me to be interviewed on A Moment with Erik Fleming, but also because in talking to him, I found what I wanted to say more, and I really wanted to engage in just an informal conversation with a brother who has been in the fight for a long time and has both inside and outside knowledge. So Erik Fleming, welcome.
Well, Sharon, it's good to be on your show. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. So let's start off by, I'm always interested in people who have run for political office, who come from, particularly people who come from oppressed people. And you run for political office, you enter with all of these grand ideas of what you're going to be able to do and what kinds of changes you are seeking to make. And then you get there and then find out that maybe the kinds of things you wanted to do, you're not able to do. But for the most part, the public does not really have an understanding of how hard it is to make change. Can you talk to us a little bit about your idealism when you entered and how your opinions changed and how do you feel now about holding elected office?
Well, I'll make that real easy. I was a hellraiser when I came in. I thought I was going to come in and shake up stuff. I mean, I grew up in Chicago. Like I said, I went to college in Mississippi and decided to live there. But I had some preconceived notions about Mississippi even being there and dealing with, be honest, white Southern men, right? So when I finally got my chance to get in, it was like literally, Ms. Sharon, the second day I was challenging a bill on the floor. My machine wasn't even working. I had to literally do hand signs and say, no or yes. And so, but I was challenging the bill because it was an issue that I had been dealing with as a grassroots activist prior to getting elected.
Before you go any further, let's tell the audience what position you were holding. I don't think we mentioned that. So you were elected
So I got elected to be a state representative. So I served in that position from 1999 to 2008. And I came in a special election in the middle of a session, which is why people were like kind of shocked that I came in knowing some stuff because they were already underway when I got there. But like I said, my machine wasn't working, but I was up there debating the bill. And I just kind of thought, there were some things that I wanted to do and really stand up for Black folks. And what I learned was that it's about building relationships. And so one of the things that really helped me establish myself within was not my oratory or my ability to read bills and all that. It was going to these committee dinners, right? And sitting down with these people and learning a little bit about them. And then what really made me I felt a great legislator my last few years there was when I ran for statewide office. When I ran for the U.S. Senate, I literally had to go into everybody's district and just getting a feel and a gauge for what those people were looking for in a representative. So when that person came to the floor or asked me to support legislation, I knew where they were coming from as opposed to just looking at them as these white Southern folks that really don't care about Black folks. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So to sum up what you just said, the relationship and building relationships puts you in a position where you can sort of seek not necessarily favors, but it's sort of like, well, if I do this for you, will you do that for me? And you are able to make more headway that way than just by being a hellraiser.
Yeah, it wasn't as much quid pro quo as it was trust. Because once people get to know you, then and the biggest commodity anybody has in the political process is their word, right? If for some reason a legislator, fellow city councilman, whatever body you're in, if they don't trust you, then you don't have any sway. So once people learned that I was not there to grandstand, I was there, as the young folks say now, standing on business. I was, I was able to get some things done when I got on the floor and spoke, whether it was asking questions or speaking from the podium. People paid attention because they knew I was serious about stuff and not just trying to get attention.
Did you feel at any point that you were forced to make concessions later in your career that you would not have even considered when you first entered into political life?
Well, I think I wish I was a little more mature. Um, I'm almost 60 now, and when I got in, I was in my 30s. And when you come out of college and you set your goal, this is what you want to do, and you achieve it at a young age, you're kind of feeling yourself a little bit. So I wish I was a little more mature in uh, how to handle certain situations. The knowledge I had was adequate. Well, I had a good grasp of what to do. But there were some times where I felt if I kind of kept my emotions in check on this particular issue as opposed to another one, um, I probably could have gotten even more stuff done, I think. But
Mm.
I was able to, like I said, be pretty effective in 9 years. My proudest moment was I went in with a notion to help improve railroad safety in the state. A friend of mine got killed a year or two before I got elected in at a railroad crossing. And I had noticed that there weren't any gates at that particular crossing. And I had covered a story the year before that where the only survivor of a crash out of 5 people in a vehicle was a young girl. And it didn't have a railroad crossing. And both of those were in the legislative district I was running in. So once I got in there, I started asking questions, trying to find out what to do. I got myself on the transportation committee. And at that time, my first 4 years on that committee, I was the only Black person on the transportation committee on the House side. But I focused in on railroad safety and I got 3 bills passed. And Mississippi, when I got in, was the #1 state in the nation as far as fatalities at railroad crossings. Just recently, when Senator Warnock was running for reelection here in Georgia for the U.S. Senate, he was addressing that issue and he posted the top 10 states, and Mississippi was not one of them. So I felt that the work that I did my first 3 years in the legislature led to that moment where we're not even in the top 10 anymore, and we were #1 when I got there. So I feel real proud about that aspect and being able to accomplish that. But like I said, if I was, and I guess when you get older, you think about that when you're younger, that you should have been a little more mature about certain situations. But yeah, that's about the only quote unquote regret I would have. I just wish I was a little more mature.
Yeah, yeah. So, in my work, providing a source of information to the progressive community in Los Angeles, we focus heavily on um, what we would like to see our society be. That's what progressivism is. But we generally don't talk about the practical ways to get there. I think it's important that we elect people to to positions of authority and to elected positions that hold the same views that we hold, but the actual structure itself, it seems to me that the structure itself does not lend itself to strong democratic processes. If you could change anything, what would you change about, like you said, your button wasn't kinds of things that the average person wouldn't even occur to us to think that something like that would have an impact on whether or not it's legislation.
Yeah, and it was just that situation with the buttons was more or less, just a transition because that seat was vacant during that session until I got there. Um, but I mean, to kind of highlight the point you're making, when the first uh, black women got into the legislature, it was like within the span of 2 years, you had the first black House member and then the first black senator, female. And it was, and though there had been females, white females in the past, nobody had even asked a question about a bathroom for the females. So it was those ladies that got bathrooms for the female members in the chamber where they could go. So I mean, to address little nuance and practical things like that. But the biggest thing about the process is, um, I well, I don't really think you can really change the process. I think what we have to do as a people is understand people's roles in the process, right? You as an activist out in the street you're much more freer than somebody like me that was in an elected position because we have to follow certain rules in order to get things passed. In essence, to try to protest some things, we have to understand the rules so we can slow down the process or challenge things or stop things from happening. Whereas as an activist, you have a lot more freedom and you have a lot more, uh, uh, I guess, mobility, or I'm trying to think of appropriate term, but freedom, I think, is the best term. Um, in order to do what you want to do and strategize the way you want to strategize. And then those people that are in the building, those people outside the building need to communicate, right? So that way, you know, even in a restricted structure like a legislature or a city council, the people that are in the building can effectively communicate what is being asked for by the people on the outside, by the citizens. And, you know, when we get that more organized, then I think we can be more effective either in passing things or stopping bad things.
You mentioned that you're in Georgia now. You're originally from Chicago, and then I believe that you were elected representative in Mississippi. Is that right? And now,
That's right.
you're in Georgia. Now you're in Georgia, where you're doing a podcast, and that's an excellent thing that you're doing. Yeah? But Georgia is like really like hot in the news right now, especially today. So there's two things that have been really pinging my website. Obviously, the hearing with Fonnie Willis, with Attorney Fonnie Willis, and also Cop City. I want to ask you about your opinions about Cop City and what's happening in Georgia. We've got a lot of Black elected representatives, but not necessarily the most progressive representation.
So I've been critical, fair or unfair, about people that I would consider my contemporaries, people that were or are state legislators here in Georgia. And, you know, they handle their business however they want to handle it. But I know in Mississippi, we were a lot more vocal. We were a lot more visible, not only media wise, but in the community. We literally had meetings where we would travel throughout the state and tell people this is what we're looking for. These are the issues we're pushing. Are there issues you want us to push that we haven't addressed at the meeting so far, right? I haven't seen that in Georgia. Now, that's my overall statement. Having said that, uh, disclaimer, I am a certified law enforcement officer in the state of Georgia. I worked for the Fulton County Sheriff's Office for 2.5 years. So I've been through the training process. And there is a need to upgrade the training facility, not only for those young men and women who seek to be deputies, but also those who work in the Atlanta Police Department. The issue is the location. So the location is one of Atlanta's strong points, which is a forest. Atlanta has more trees than any other major city in the United States per square mile. And it was once once they got public transportation and started putting certain restrictions on emissions and all that, that helped the trees do their job and make Atlanta one of the least polluted cities in the United States. Now, if you're allergic to pollen, this is probably not the place to come. But as far as pollution goes, Atlanta has some of the cleanest air. So the forest, which is basically in the DeKalb County part of Atlanta, a private developer had already bought part of it to build a studio. So there were people already protesting that. So when the city decided right after the George Floyd murder to upgrade training, they decided to build this state-of-the-art facility in that same forest. So now, instead of just protesting a part of the forest, now you're talking about half of the forest being gone. Now, they picked that spot because a long time ago, it used to be the state penal farm out there. And so, and I think there's an abandoned building still out there that kind of designates where they were trying to set up. But, now you're talking about that, taking away half of the forest with these two projects. The citizens that live around that area don't want it there. And they've made that clear. They've signed petitions. They've presented their petitions to the city council, and the city council unanimously voted to go ahead with the project anyway. So that's why there's a lot of tension there. We had one person get killed by the police there. A protester, but that one of the officers that was involved was wounded as well. So the protester shot him. So, that's why there's been an outcry about the level of force, but that particular law enforcement agency, the Georgia State Patrol, no longer goes and deals with that situation because it was one of their officers that got shot, and they were the ones that killed the young man. So it's been strictly Atlanta police trying to deal with the protesters and so on and so forth. I just don't understand when citizens say what they want, and they're very, very clear about it, that not even their city council person, the one that they elected, didn't stand up for them in that meeting. That would have been, even if that council person had been the only person to vote against it, they should have voted against it. So that's why there's tension, because, Atlanta prides itself on being a progressive city, but not so much,
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and then,
that's
so
what I find. That's the main thing that I find curious, is that there is just so much opposition, and yet the city council continues to support it. And so then that goes on to my second question. With you being a person who has run for elected office in one, it's beginning to feel like the voice of the people is meaningless. And what carries more weight is whoever is funding your campaign. Everybody else must be pulling the strings here.
well, and just to finish up a point, the guy who got elected mayor, Andre Dickens, beat the woman who pushed for a cop city. He beat her. She was the city council president. And that was part of the reason why people voted for him instead of her, was because of the proposed cop city project. And now he's in support of it. So, but to get to your point about the money, Atlanta is the ninth richest city in the United States. A lot of people don't realize that. But when you look at the companies that started there, Waffle House, Home Depot, Coca-Cola, um, they already had a leg over a lot of cities that have 3 Fortune 500 companies that started in that city, let alone other companies moving in. Invesco just moved from out west, I think in Denver, and now they're situated in Atlanta. Carvana has moved to Atlanta. So Atlanta has an incredible amount of wealth, not only within the actual city boundary, but in the surrounding area. The city itself only has 500,000 people, but the surrounding area has 6.1 million. And the wealth gap in the city of Atlanta is one of the highest, if not the highest, in the nation. So you have a city that is majority Black who has the largest wealth disparity in the country. So yeah, money plays a big part. But besides money in the traditional sense, the way you and I and other people look at it as far as PACs and all this stuff, there is a culture here where Maynard Jackson, the first Black mayor who got elected in Atlanta 50 years ago, his grandfather was the person who first started organizing Black people to vote in Georgia. Atlanta. He started the Atlanta Civic League, I think it was called. And his name was John Wesley Dobbs, and there's a street named after him here in Atlanta. But so Maynard Jackson is part of that legacy, and a lot of the politics, especially in the Black community in Atlanta, is based off of that legacy. So if you're an outsider, it's really, really tough sledding unless you get the blessing of that legacy. And, I even had somebody tell me that he doesn't even participate in a lot of stuff. He'll go vote, but he's not getting involved because he figures that if that candidate that he likes is not supported by the legacy, he knows that candidate's not going to win. And we've had some people in Atlanta elected outside of that, but it was tough sledding for them when they got in. And some are still in and some are out. So that's kind of the combination. It's like you got to get this blessing from a certain group of folks, and you got to deal with the money that is floating out here in an incredible way. And then you got to deal with the folks that fall into the temptation, right? One of the things I used to pride myself on was, and I'm trying to be quick and tell the story, but we were dedicating a post office after Medgar Evers in Jackson, and 2 former FBI directors showed up and kind of pulled me to the side and said, "Representative, we've never seen your name come across our desk." And I said, "Good, and you never will," right? I bring that up because a lot of Black politicians try to emulate some of their white colleagues and do certain things that they ain't supposed to do. But whereas we make up only 8 to 9% of all the elected officials in the nation, we make up over a third of all the ones that get indicted. And
Great point.
we've had some high profile folks since I've been in Atlanta go down that road. So, it's tricky, but it's something that can be managed. But we got to get elected officials, not just the folks that we scream at the TV at, uh, but the folks that look like us that live in our neighborhoods to be as responsive to us too. And that's been the biggest problem with Cop City is just the folks that look like us are not responding to us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wanted to keep this under 20 minutes. We haven't been successful at that, but that's okay because you're really sharing good information. Erik, how can people find your podcast, stay up to date with what you're doing now?
So the my podcast, The Moment with Erik Fleming, is on every podcast platform. So you just type in A Moment with Erik Fleming, you'll find it. If you want to find out more about the show, go to www.momenterik.com. And I'm pretty much on every social media platform, even X. So you can just look for me there too.
Erik Fleming, thank you for spending some time with us. I'm looking forward to continuing to follow you and learn more from you, and like to see you come back again sometime.
All right, Ms. Sharon, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Thank you.
Great. Have a great day. So long.
Yes, ma'am, you too.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.